Hello and welcome to the turbulent world with me, James M. Dorsey, as your host. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar celebrated this week a diplomatic victory by delaying European sanctions against the Jewish state. It's a victory that could prove to be pyrrhic. That is, if EU foreign ministers, increasingly critical of Israel's conduct in the Gaza war, put their money where their mouth is and make good on their threat to suspend the Jewish state's 25-year-old association agreement with the European Union because of its human rights violations. On Tuesday, the ministers delayed a decision by 2 weeks to impose punitive measures if Israel fails to implement a July 10 agreement to increase the flow of desperately needed humanitarian aid into Gaza. European diplomats said the ministers had delayed their decision to give Gaza ceasefire talks, mediated by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, a chance to succeed. The diplomats said Israeli concessions on the scope of its military presence in Gaza during a renewed ceasefire had enhanced the chances of a ceasefire agreement. As part of the humanitarian aid agreement, Israel committed to increasing the number of daily trucks bringing into Gaza food, fuel, and other items, as well as the opening of additional crossing points into the strip, the reopening of the Jordanian and Egyptian aid routes, and the distribution of food supplies through bakeries and public kitchens throughout the territory. Israel has blocked or throttled the entry of humanitarian goods into Gaza since early March. The measures have severely worsened the plight of Gaza's 2.3 million Palestinians. The threat of a suspension followed the release last month of a European Commission report asserting that there are indications that Israel would be in breach of its human rights obligations under the association agreement. This week, the United Nations Security Council discussed the humanitarian crisis in Gaza at the request of 4 EU members: Denmark, France, Greece, and Slovenia, alongside the United Kingdom. Days later, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, a one-time staunch supporter of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, charged that the attacks on civilians that Israel has been carrying out for months are unacceptable. No military action can justify such behavior, she said. Mrs. Meloni spoke after Israel attacked the Catholic Church in Gaza, killing 3 people. In a rare apology, Mr. Netanyahu said stray ammunition caused the incident. At the same time, Slovenia declared Israeli ultra-nationalist ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich persona non grata, the first EU member to do so. Slovenia followed similar bans by Britain, Norway, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. The government charged that the National Security and Finance Minister had incited extreme violence and serious violations of the human rights of Palestinians with their genocidal statements. Messieurs Ben-Gvir and Smotrich advocate Israeli occupation of the West Bank, conquered by Israel in the 1967 Middle East War, and expedited settlement activity in the territory and Gaza. Mr. Smotrich has called for total annihilation of Gaza, while Mr. Ben-Gvir, whom Israeli courts have repeatedly convicted on racism-related charges, makes regularly incendiary remarks about Palestinians and, more recently, Syrians. For its part, the Irish Parliament is likely to pass a bill legalizing a boycott of goods from Israeli businesses operating in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the first such legislation by an EU member. Addressing the Security Council, UN humanitarian aid coordinator Tom Fletcher warned that the fuel crisis in Gaza remains at a critical threshold, despite the Israel-EU agreement. Mr. Fletcher acknowledged that since the agreement, Israel has allowed 10 fuel trucks a week to enter Gaza for the first time in 130 days. but still refuses the entry of petrol needed for ambulances and other humanitarian vehicles. He suggested that Israel may permit a slight increase in the number of fuel trucks. Even so, Mr. Fletcher laid out the obstacle course, including bureaucratic hurdles, multiple inspections, and transfers to several trucks aid needs to maneuver before being allowed to enter Gaza. Once in Gaza, criminal gangs and starving people, desperate for a bag of flour, attacked the aid convoys, Mr. Fletcher said. In addition, the amount of aid entering Gaza remains minuscule compared to the Strip's needs. 2 trucks a day provide a fraction of what is required to run essential life-sustaining services, Mr. Fletcher said. He noted that since May 19, Israel has allowed only 1,600 trucks, or 62% of the number of lorries requested by the UN to enter Gaza, compared to the 630 trucks going into the Strip daily during a ceasefire agreed in January that Israel unilaterally violated in March. To be clear, it's a drop in the ocean of what is needed, Mr. Fletcher said. Mr. Fletcher noted that Israel obstructed the provision of aid by rejecting security clearances and visas for aid workers. He said Israel this year had denied 56% of the submitted applications for entry into Gaza of medical emergency personnel. It doesn't have to be this way. We have planned a plan that works. It requires predictable aid, different types, and at scale, entering multiple crossings where people do not come under fire, traveling on routes that we choose without long delays, distributed to our distribution points and warehouses, according to long-established UN mechanisms and humanitarian principles, Mr. Fletcher said. Journalist Amir Tibon asserted that EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas had given Mr. Sa'ar, the Israeli Foreign Minister, an escape route by failing to publish details of the humanitarian aid agreement, such as the number of trucks allowed into Gaza. Kallas should have known that this specific government is full of liars, thieves, and demagogues who place no value on their own word and constantly spout and spread disinformation. By not publishing the exact terms of the agreement, she made it incredibly easy for the Israeli government to slow walk, dilute, and deny its own commitments, Mr. Tibon said. The fate of the deal's implementation now depends on how much the EU's top diplomat will insist and how the bloc's important countries will respond if Sa'ar and other members of the Netanyahu government will sabotage it, the journalist added. Israel has good reason to take the threat of EU suspension seriously. Europe, rather than the United States, is Israel's largest trading partner, as well as the foremost destination for Israeli investments, according to the Amsterdam-based Center for Research on Multinational Corporations. The center reported that the EU in 2023 held 72.1 billion euros in investments in Israel, compared to the United States' 39.2 billion. Similarly, Israel invested 65.9 billion euros in the EU, 7 times more than the 8.8 billion in the United States. In 2024, European trade with Israel totaled 42.6 billion euros, significantly more than the 31.6 billion euros with the United States in the same year. Israel may feel that a potential United Arab Emirates and United States engineered Mauritanian recognition of Israel, despite the ongoing Gaza war, could make Europe more hesitant to act against it. The touted move would break the so far united position of the majority of Arab states that have not recognized Israel and insist that relations depend on Israel committing to an irreversible path towards an independent Palestinian state. European opponents of the sanctioning of Israel argue that punitive measures would send the wrong signal at a time when some Arab states may be willing to move forward in their relations with Israel. In favor of the proponents of sanctions, Israel strikes this week in the Syrian capital of Damascus, including at the defense ministry, and targets near the presidential palace are likely to delay any Mauritanian move. Gulf states, with the UAE in the lead, have moved quickly to support the government of President Ahmed al-Shara after Europe and the United States lifted sanctions imposed on the regime of ousted President Bashar al-Assad. Israel opposed the lifting, arguing that Mr. al-Shara had not shed his jihadist antecedents, and insisting that the Syrian military stay out of southern Syria as part of Israel's post-October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel strategy to militarily emasculate its perceived foes. We are acting to prevent the Syrian regime from harming the Druze and to ensure the demilitarization of the area adjacent to our border with Syria, said Mr. Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz in a joint statement. The strikes followed the entry of Syrian forces into the predominantly Druze southern Syrian city of As-Suwaida to quell clashes between Druze militias and Bedouin tribesmen. Anti-government Druze elements and Israeli media reports accused the Syrian military of committing atrocities. Like with Mauritania, the strikes are likely to complicate high-level Israeli-Syrian contacts aimed at achieving a security understanding, if not Syrian recognition of Israel. Earlier, Mr. Netanyahu seemed to downplay the possibility of an agreement with Syria, insisting that the current opportunity was for security and only eventually peace. Mr. Ben-Gvir, Mr. Netanyahu's controversial national security minister, added fuel to the fire by asserting that the only solution was to eliminate Mr. al-Shara. All of this suggests that firm European action could play a role in breaking the Middle East cycle of violence, if it musters the necessary political will. To be sure, that is if with a capital I. Thank you for joining me today. Thousands across the globe are avid readers and listeners of the turbulent world. Join them in helping me maintain and expand the column and podcast by becoming a paid supporter. Paid subscribers know they are supporting independent writing, reporting, and analysis that lets the chips fall where they may. You can contribute by going to jamesmdorsey.substack.com and choosing one of the subscription options. Thank you for your support and loyalty. Take care and see you soon.